Hi, everyone. Pastor Galen, lead pastor at Shine Hills Church. Thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. We hope that these podcasts will be a real encouragement to you on your spiritual journey. You can also connect with Shine Hills at shinehills.org. Hope you enjoy the program.
We are across the street and around the world. Shine Hills.
Well, hello again, everybody, and it's been a long time, and welcome to the podcast. Nathan, it's been a long time since we've talked.
Man, it's good to see
I mean,
you.
you just walked
happened.
in. I know, you just walked in the door, and we always say, what's new? What do you want to talk about? And there's been so much happened since the last time we met, and I just started pinging you with bullet points. I just want to start out with one because this is kind of random because there were some people talking about this recently about a school board meeting and issues and stuff. And it sounded to me like it was a very interesting talk or interesting debate, what was going on at that time. I guess in general, from what you've seen or heard, the new school board that's now in place, how would you what's their grade so far?
Well, thus far, it's pretty good. I'm very thankful finally to have a conversation regarding whether or not, pornography in libraries should be an opt-in or an opt-out kind of question.
Okay. So that's the question that's on the table right now for them to decide on?
That's right.
Oh, interesting.
And they've done, I think, a pretty good job even allowing the question to come forward. And there's a lot of momentum all across society, and you probably have noticed this all across the nation, where people are finally fed up with being forced into something that is so adversarial to a properly run family and to parental rights. Yeah. And so I think our school board's done a good job of bringing this up.
One thing that someone brought up to my mind, I hadn't even thought about this, but the books that are in the library, it's not just the physical book that's there, but it's also access to the internet.
That's right.
So is there a way to opt in or opt out of that as well, or is that part of the discussion or not?
That's one of the things our school board is looking at right now. How
Even
to
the
make
internet.
that an opt-in, right? Exactly. And not only that, when we look at, so they came up with this. I was at a meeting on Monday evening where they were talking about all of this. Someone came up with a statistic that it wouldn't cost an actual $100,000, but it would be $100,000 worth of teachers' time and salary for them to study through 10 books. So basically $10,000 a book.
Oh, wow.
And to be able to see whether or not it was appropriate to be in the library. Now, obviously, you probably have heard this before. We've talked about it in the legislature. They call it death by fiscal note. And so it's a way to kill a good idea by saying, oh, no, it's just too expensive.
Well, there's already a committee, I thought, used to be, right?
Right.
There was a committee that was vetting those books, and they were teachers.
Right.
And so is that what they're talking about?
That's what they're trying to talk about.
And they're saying it's that much time to go through 10 books.
Exactly. Well,
Wow.
part of the problem with all of this,
I think the teachers read a little better than that, just my guess.
You would hope.
Yeah.
But one of the things that's been the problem is the point of origin for most of these books. We've talked about this before here. The American Library Association has been very corrupted for many, many years. But starting in about 2007, they began to award special prizes to basically LGBTQ plus literature.
Okay.
Increasingly, it has gone further and further toward the T in all of that. And so the American Library Association...
T meaning trans, is that what you're
trans,
saying?
that's
Gotcha.
right.
Gotcha.
And so they are the ones that have been massively pushing in libraries and in school libraries and everywhere else, books that are extremely problematic. And so I think it's time for us to begin to pull away from a corrupted source. It's very difficult to try to put a filtering screen in front of something that is just pumping raw sewage out.
Yeah, right.
It'd be better to turn to a clean, better source than to continually try to pump, filter for the sewage.
I see that. So, well, I'm glad to hear that it seems like, that was my impression. It's like, it seems like this board has really measured. I like the idea of an opt-in because that puts the onus on the person. It's like, okay, if you want to have your child exposed to these things, you need to opt in so they can. Otherwise, everybody's.
That's right.
That would be my preference. I hope they can push that one through.
I hope so too. And I think if they do that, they're just recognizing where America is right now.
Yeah.
We have had so many people push these horrific ideas for such a long time that finally, I think this year we reached a tipping point, and we watched it with the Bud Light conversation.
Oh, yeah.
We've watched it now with Target,
Yeah.
with clothing where people can tuck male anatomy
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
their clothing and everything else. We've watched now with, I think it's $50 billion in the Anheuser-Busch Corporation that they've lost already at this point,
Is that right?
and
Wow.
now close to 15 billion in Target.
Wow.
And it's because people are tired of corporations constantly moralizing against what is very clear in the common sense of every American, of every human being that has ever
Yeah.
been alive.
Yeah.
And so they're tired of that.
So I still have my questions. I'd love to ask you some more
Yeah.
questions about the why. Why do you think? Let's take Bud Light, because we haven't talked since Bud Light.
Right.
I mean, there's been a
Exactly.
lot that's happened.
Right. It is.
But I didn't realize that was the number that they were up to now. Well, I've had this people push back, or I've seen different arguments. It's like, hey, this is going to ruin our economy because we can't boycott this company and this company. And it's like, well, I don't think this means people are going to stop drinking beer. They're going to stop drinking Bud Light. They're going to drink
Right.
something else.
Yeah,
So
because
does
there's
it
a
aff-
corresponding rise in other companies.
So it's the net effect to the economy. That
Right.
was the argument. It's like it's just going to destroy the economy. It's like it seems like people are just going to substitute that.
Absolutely.
But it's like why? Why would Bud Light and then even Target, knowing what they saw with Bud Light, why would they do this? Do you think is there a pressure of some kind, or do you think it's just a core value
Well, no, I don't believe it's a core value for everyone. There may be some, for sure.
for some yeah.
But I think what we've watched is for the last 30 or 40 years, academia, institutions have begun to claim that these are the worldviews that must be pushed forward.
Yeah.
And therefore, you must take over these corporations and begin advancing an agenda. Because it's the most difficult thing for a Marxist ideology to take over a strong economy.
Yeah.
And so the only way to do that is then to try to take over the economy through the corporations themselves.
So why does the corporations are super smart? They got a lot of
Mhm.
way smart people on there's those boards and the
Mhm.
CEOs. Why would they even approach this knowing, for example, knowing what happened with Bud Light?
Right.
Why would Target do this, do you think?
Well, so I think with Target at this point, this is something coming out that they were over the last 10 years, they have been truly at the top level. They have been kind of corrupted.
Oh, so more of a value.
Right.
Okay,
right.
I can see
I don't
that.
know if that was true with Bud Light, but I know it was
Yeah.
true with Target.
Okay, that's kind of what has been my
Mhm.
question. It's like, how can these people, they can see this happen right before their eyes, and then Target jumped
Right.
into that. That was
You
interesting.
know, for a good resource on that, there is an episode, I believe, that would have been June the 6th, on a program called The World and Everything in It, where they talk about that, and specifically Target, and talk about how they used to have some sort of dialogue, but now that dialogue has ceased as they have become very entrenched in their position. And when you look at why would they make such a terrible decision when it hurts their bottom line?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, if all of the experts, if you will, all being trained from the same very left-leaning institutions, are all saying the same thing, you're just going to figure, okay, I'll trust the experts. But the
Okay.
experts don't have really well researched ideas. What they're doing is they're parroting what they're told by others.
Yeah.
And eventually the American populace is so frustrated and oversaturated. They're like, no, I'm done.
Well, it's interesting to me, and to me, my line. Everybody has a line, and I
Mhm.
think we just saw society's line today.
Yeah.
Not today, but in the last hunk of time, we've seen society draw a line. It's like, okay, not there. We're not
Right.
going to go there
Right.
for whatever reason. They said that that line was drawn. Mine has been innocence of our kids. I think
Amen.
our discussions and our conversations. That's the one thing. I mean, that kind of came up. You and I talked about innocence. Why can't we protect the innocence of our kids? That's 3 years ago, at
Right.
least, when you and I were talking. So that really has kind of stuck around for me. It's like, yeah, that's my line. If you can do a lot of things, it doesn't mean I agree or whatever, but I'm not condoning. I'm just saying. But when you get to the innocence of our kids, it seems like the church needs to say, okay, we've got to be a part of somehow.
Yeah.
That's my involvement with the school board. It's the innocence of kids.
Right.
That's a place where I can feel my soul saying, you can't be silent on this one. And I think everybody has that line somewhere.
Agreed.
But it seemed like, and I may be wrong, but it seemed like what we saw with Bud Light and maybe even with Target now, the society is basically saying, "Oh, wait a minute, you just step past the line."
Right.
Do you feel that way?
100%.
Yeah.
The great thing about it is you've been sounding the warning now for a number of years, and the world is finally catching up to it. And so you've been talking about the protection of children and the preservation of their innocence and everything else. Yeah. And I think finally this year, when there were children's T-shirts being sold at Target that have naked human anatomy all over it, and they're designed for children, and all those little things, or other ones that says something about Satanism all over it and all that other stuff. Finally, people are like, wait a second, okay, yeah, that's wrong. And the funny thing is, they might forget the warning that you were giving 3 years ago. But everyone
I don't think that many people are listening to this podcast. But anyway, I think what we're talking about though has been, we were kind of felt like unicorns for a while, but I don't feel so much that way now.
Right.
A couple of reasons.
It's a funny use of animals right there, because unicorns.
They probably shouldn't have made a bad metaphor. Yeah. You just feel like you're the oddball in this whole thing. And it's like, I feel like America is starting to see, and maybe the church, I'm not sure. I'm not that great on assessing social trends and whatnot, because some people are masters at that, and I just listen to what they say. But it does seem like there's been a shift. And I think Bud Light kind of helped her show us what that shift was.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's so okay. So in that same, I guess, line of thinking, Matt Walsh, have you've been listening to anything that's going on? The What is a Woman, and even the whole Twitter thing with Elon Musk. Have you been involved in any of that? Or
I have.
Watched it? Okay, so for people that may not have, I'm going to do my best interpretation of what I saw happen. So I think Matt Walsh put this What is a Woman? This book has been out, I'm going to say a couple of years.
That's right.
Okay, and I think I read parts of it. I don't know. It seems like I've read bits and pieces of it, or someone gave me a book or whatever. And but then he put it into a documentary. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how recent that's been, but anyway,
fairly recent.
Okay. Yeah. So now that documentary has been put out it was out on the internet. Well, since Twitter now is a free platform for everybody to post on, you can he posted that whole 50-some minute documentary, maybe longer than that, I don't know, on Twitter. Is that right? Twitter? Yeah, it was Twitter. Yeah. And so then he got censored by Twitter. Mm-hmm. And then he or their company fired off, said, "Hey, Elon, you say you're all free speech and blah, blah, blah. Why can't we do this?" And he said, well, and apparently he looked into it, right? And then he watched it, and he said, not only is this should be on Twitter, he said every parent in America should watch it.
Right.
All right. Now that number, I've watched this number go up. It went from like the hundreds of thousands to I think the last time I looked, 142 million people have watched that worldwide.
I was wondering what it was up to.
I don't know what that was about. That was a few days ago. Mm-hmm. But it had this effect. They call it the Streisand effect. Do you know this?
No.
Well, I think Elon Musk said that this thing, someone said it about this phenomenon that's happening. It's the Streisand effect. And I'm not totally sure what that is. But I think Barbara Streisand out in California, she said something about don't take pictures of my house or something like that, and then everybody went and looked at the house, right? That kind of thing, something along that line. But it's something that somebody really important said, do this or don't do this, and everybody jumped on it. And so it's really been an interesting. Of course, that documentary just to me is fascinating. The question that he asks is. And it stumps everybody that's on the trans side. It's like, you can't answer.
But you'll go to an African tribe or somewhere else.
Oh, my gosh.
They know exactly. And this is one of the things I've talked about it here at this church and everywhere else. When we go backwards and we look at the weird society, Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic societies, we have been educated to a level of nonsense that anyone else in the world who is confronted with reality, they know exactly what real is.
Yeah. Well, that's so true. And they were, you could tell when Matt Walsh was asking this Kenyan tribe,
Yeah.
These questions, what if, a man wants to identify as a woman, and how do you know what a woman is? And they were chuckling among themselves as the translator was translated it, and you could just tell it's like, it's like at the end of all this questioning, they were of course laughing it off and answered, very directly. And at the end of that, he said, now, would any of you want to move to America? And they just wouldn't have anything apart, no part of that nonsense. And
yeah.
So, no, it was interesting. I thought, I'm glad you've seen that. I didn't
have
a chance to talk to you about
he's
that.
had a little clips for a while, and I'm so glad to see it all stitched together into something like this that is making an impact, because people know truth.
Yeah.
And it's time for people to actually stand up for truth again. It's worth conserving.
Yeah. One of the things that, this is random. So I haven't talked to you in a long time. So this is random. Away, but one of the things I was fascinated, I think I just heard this last night or maybe the day before. Somebody said, have you listened to Bobby Kennedy?
Yes.
He's a Democratic candidate for president, right? Mm-hmm. So he's proclaimed to be, he's already put his name in the hat. Is that correct?
Right. That's right.
So he was on with Elon Musk and several others, and they were on Twitter. I think I was Twitter. I think it is, though. I
think so.
It's on Twitter, yeah. There's so much on Twitter now. It's like a whole different thing. But one of the things that fascinated me was not only his take on free speech, which I was like, oh my gosh, he is spot on, in my opinion. But what I was impressed with, too, was Elon Musk's take on free speech and what he's willing to risk. And then here's the comment I want to throw out to you because I thought it was interesting. Bobby Kennedy basically said, Elon, you are the same kind of cloth, if you will. He didn't use that word, as our early fathers of our Constitution, who were willing to risk monetary, doesn't matter what the financial cost is, to protect free speach.
Love it.
Isn't that amazing to think?
It's time too. Absolutely.
My naivete is that I know it's a big deal. No question it's a big deal. Mm-hmm. I don't think I've seen until just recently how big, not in the last 3 to 4 years, how big a deal and why our founders said free speech is so big. Because if you start losing that, boy, you slip into places you don't want to go politically.
So there's a statement in the U.S. Capitol building that reads this way. It says, without freedom of thought, there can be no such thing as wisdom and no such thing as public liberty without freedom of speech. Wow. That was a statement made by Benjamin Franklin in the year 1722. Wow. 67 years before his work at the Constitutional Convention and the Bill of Rights.
Wow.
But the reason he was making that statement is because to truly have a free society, you have to have the opportunity to have a difference of opinion.
Yeah.
If everyone's always believing the same thing, it usually means that someone is being forced into that opinion.
Right.
And so when we look at that understanding, back then, Ben Franklin, in that early year, he was only 60 years removed from someone who had much in common with you and me. 60 years prior to that, a man by the name of John Bunyan had been locked into the Bedford Village jail for daring to speak what he knew to be true in his heart. And he was held up by something known as the Conventicle Act. And what it was doing was it was the English government declaring that no preacher could preach what he wants or preach straight from the Bible without the leave of the king and parliament.
Right.
And so when you look at that, the founding of our country is exactly what is causing folks like Elon Musk and Bobby Kennedy Jr. and other people to talk about this. And by the way, I don't agree with everything those men say, but I agree with their right to say it. And that's where Christians have always been.
Absolutely. Well, I don't know how many times I've said this. I think every time that I'm on, that we do something for Memorial Day or something for Veterans Day, or, and I make the point is, the reason I can stand up here, and this is why we want to honor our military, the freedom that we have because of our sacrifice of our men and women of this country over the years, is we still have the right to preach from this Bible and no one is telling me what to say.
That's right.
Right. And I didn't realize that it went back to this one particular act that you were just talking about, but I knew that was alive and well. That the preachers back in the UK was, I guess, New England back in that particular time is what they. Or, no, it wouldn't have been New England in the UK, I guess.
Yeah, in England. Yeah.
In England, they were being suppressed. They had to filter everything they said through the king, right. And if he didn't want it said, it wasn't said.
Absolutely.
And or if he did have an edict, you better work that into your sermon somehow. And that kind of freedom is so valuable. And I don't think, since we've never had that taken away from us, we don't really realize it. And I think we've seen free speech suppressed, and I think people are going, whoa, this is a bigger deal.
Absolutely.
Than we realized.
We've had the privilege of living in a very brief space and time where you have the right to speak what's on your mind and to live according to the dictates of your conscience.
Yeah.
The problem that we have today is when you have bakers and photographers who are being told that they will bow to government, for instance, in Colorado, that baker down there.
Oh, yeah, right.
That you will be put out of business unless you bow to government. Right. Based upon the dictates of your conscience, then what's happened is we have seen people destroying what is good, true, and beautiful. What real freedom of conscience? What real the promise of the First Amendment? What it is?
And I'm so glad you said it. It's not just freedom of speech, but freedom of conscience. And you made such a big deal about that when we first started. You kept saying and talking about how important that was. That's true freedom.
That's right.
And when you can, so that's. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Well, let me just say this. So have you ever heard, as a 28-year-old man, there was a fellow that gave a speech, and this is about 1830 something, and it was called the Lyceum speech.
Okay.
And he gave it to a young group of men. So he's 28 years old, and he made this statement. He said, the legal inheritors of certain fundamental blessings received from a once hardy, brave, and patriotic, but now departed race of ancestors, was under fire.
Yep.
And he said, they were a fortress of strength, but what invading foemen could never do, silent artillery of time, has done, they are now gone. And what they left to the generations to follow was a powerful country. And he said, all of the armies of Europe, Asia, and Africa combined, with all the treasures of the earth in their military chest, with a Bonaparte for a commander, could not by force take a drink from the Ohio River or make track upon the Blue Ridge Mountains.
Wow.
And the young Abraham Lincoln, 28 years of age, he said this, at what point then is the approach of danger to be expected? I answer, if it ever reach us, it must spring up among us. It cannot come from abroad.
Wow.
If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. And as a nation of freemen, we must live through all time, or we will die by suicide.
Wow.
And what we're seeing today is this idea, this tyranny of ideas that are antithetical to freedom of speech, to the ideas of our founders, where people try to redefine freedom as the absence of moral law.
Yeah.
What we're watching is a wonderful nation that needs to be reminded of where she's from,
right,
or she will fail.
Yeah.
And it will happen on our watch. And we just need to stand up and say that can't happen.
Well, boy, and that's the courage that it takes to, and I feel a little bit of a resurgence. I'm not going to say that tides turn, because I'm not like the social guru of knowing what's going on, but I can sense even in my own soul, there's a sense of traction that free speech, and if I have an opinion about something, that I can say that and not be not live in fear for my stance.
That's good.
That's good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, we keep saying it here, and we hope we're going to land here. We just burned through 25 minutes,
My goodness.
Nathan.
This goes so fast.
It went fast. But anyway, it's good to have you back, and we want everybody out there to be strong and very courageous. God bless you guys.